This week began with Canada expelling Indian diplomats over alleged connections to murder, violence, and extortion. And now the United States has charged a former Indian intelligence officer for his role in an alleged murder-for-hire plot. Prosecutors say this was the target of that assassination plot. He's Gurpatwant Singh Panun, the Sikh independence activist who was on this show on Tuesday. The U.S. indictment also suggests a connection to the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar in Surrey, British Columbia last year. Suspected connections to Nijjar's murder are one of the reasons Canada expelled those 6 Indian diplomats. Today, reporters asked Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister whether more expulsions could follow.
You know, they're clearly on notice. And clearly, we won't tolerate any diplomats that are in contravention of the Vienna Convention. And clearly, any diplomats from any party from around any country, from around the world.
India has ordered 6 Canadian diplomats to leave by tomorrow. So, how can diplomacy move forward with these expulsions and allegations of murder? Cameron MacKay is Canada's most recent High Commissioner to India, and he joins me now. Mr. MacKay, thanks for being here today.
David, thanks very much for having me.
So you left your post in August to come back to Canada. This is why Stuart Wheeler was filling in, and he's one of the 6 diplomats who have been expelled from India over this. How does Canada begin to re-engage with India with diplomatic tensions at this point?
Well, I think Canada's top priority at the moment, of course, is public safety on the streets in Canada. Is accountability for what has been happening in Canada. And I think it's going to take, given the response so far from the government of India, it's going to take a very long time to dig out of this. So it's important from a diplomatic point of view, of course, to keep channels of communication open, and they do remain open. And I think as well, both governments would do well to try to minimize the damage that this diplomatic dispute could cause to the people-to-people and the business-to-business part of the relationship. That's absolutely the government of Canada's view, and we hope that India will collaborate on that. There's no reason for innocent parties to pay a price for this.
Do you think that's going to be India's priority and focus, though? If you look at the language and what they're saying about the allegations, I mean, you would have been there as the High Commissioner when the Prime Minister made public the allegations that they suspected agents of India were involved in the killing of Mr. Nijjar. Based on what we've seen, do you think they're worried about the consequences of those relationships you outlined?
Well, I think this obviously is a fiasco on the part of the Indian government. I mean, to think that certain agents of the Indian government could contract violent crimes across North America and get away with it, that was a tremendous strategic error. I think there were tactical errors that led, these people to be caught, and I'm referring now both to what has happened in Canada and, of course, in the United States. And so the Indian government position, I think, up to now vis-a-vis Canada has been to deny and to vilify Canada and to distract its, domestic audience from the real facts of what's been happening here. And they do that by attacking Canada. So repairing diplomatic relations with Canada is not high on the government of India's agenda at the moment. I think it'll take, a good long while before we get anything close back to normal.
Shortly after Prime Minister Trudeau made his allegation linking India to the killing of Mr. Nijjar, there was, as you've referenced, this filing in the Southern District of New York in the United States about the murder-for-hire plot against Gurpatwant Singh Panun. And there's now been a member of the Indian intelligence service charged in the United States with this. From the beginning, Prime Minister Modi has been willing to cooperate with President Biden, at least show a veneer of cooperation, while it's been the total opposite with Canada. What do you make of the difference in the response from India on this? Is it just superpower versus middle power? How do you view it?
Yeah, well, that's one way to summarize it. I mean, I think that, the indictment and the charges in the United States just yesterday, and then the indictment that was released November 29th of 2023, paint a really compelling and rather detailed portrait of a single plot emanating from Delhi to kill multiple targets across North America, in Canada, and the United States. And so you put those two indictments together with the evidence that was released and the comments made by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police on Monday, and you have a very clear picture, in fact, of what has been going on, for well over a year now. It's been very embarrassing for the government of India internationally. It's done some real damage, to the Indian brand, I think, among democratic rule of law countries. But domestically, the Indian government has responded by, as I said earlier, vilifying Canada, denying all the, the charges, et cetera. With respect to the United States, I think India can't afford to take that approach. The United States plays a very different role globally, has a very different relationship with India bilaterally, and so they have the government of India, from a communications point of view and a substantive point of view, have taken very different approaches between the two countries. They simply can't afford to do to the U.S. what they think they can do to Canada.
A lot of Western countries, a lot of the democratic countries that are part of the alliances and the organizations of which Canada is a member, have been counting on India to be a bit of a counterweight to China in that part of the world. But when you look at what the Indian government stands accused of here, when you look at Narendra Modi's role in things like the BRICS alliance, cozying up to China, Russia, buying oil and weapons from Russia, can Canada and its allies in the West really count on India to play that role, given the nature of what we're seeing from the Indian government?
Well, I think it's important to step back from, the current problems and the current government in India and look at India in its totality. A very important country, world's most populated country, world's fifth largest economy, long-standing democracy since its independence after the Second World War. India is a rule of law country, and I think Canada and other countries want to have a better relationship, with India. And I do think that in the long run, because we're both democracies, because we're both rule of law countries, strategically our interests are aligned in the long run. But the kind of behavior that we've seen, from the government of India very recently has crossed some very serious red lines, and Canada has therefore had to take the action that it has. So we need some accountability first, and then one day I think we will return to a better and more collaborative relationship with the government of India. In the meantime, as I said earlier, I think it's important to put in perspective that this dispute at the moment is between the two governments, and there is no reason for innocent parties, the friends and family that want to travel between the two countries, the businesses that are investing and traveling between the two countries. I would hope that the Indian government agrees with Canada that, that should all continue unimpeded, and there's no reason for them to pay the price for these terrible mistakes that have been made.
You've talked about India being the world's largest democracy, calling it a rule of law country. But based on the allegations that we're talking about, can we credibly say the Modi government is a rule of law government?
Well, I think India is a rule of law country. There's no question about it, and India is a democracy. It has weaknesses and it has flaws in its rule of law, as does Canada and every other country. We all struggle with that every day as we work to improve our governance and our democracies. So, and what's important in the longer run is that those of us who believe in democracy and rule of law, and Canada and India are aligned in that way, that we find better ways to work together.
Right, but I mean, there are the natural tensions that exist in a democracy, and then there's being accused of multiple countries of transnational repression up to the level of assassination plots and actual murder. I mean, that is well outside the rule of law. So what does that tell us about the fundamental character of the Modi government from Canada's point of view?
Well, again, I'm going to say some very serious red lines have been crossed, and it's for that reason that Canada has taken the strong diplomatic and law enforcement action, that it has up to now. But over the longer run, Canada does want, a better relationship with India. There's a lot that we can and should be doing together. But clearly, some folks in Delhi made some very serious fundamental errors in their decision-making, over the last couple of years, and we need to see some accountability for that before things get normal again.
How long do you think that might be, just as a final point, Mr. MacKay? Because India has long accused Canada of being soft on Sikh extremism and allowing these referenda and what they call hate speech and terrorist organization to happen on Canadian soil, which is an allegation Canada has rejected. But, they have now refuted all of the allegations and leaked aggressively to their media against the Canadian government's motivations. This does not seem like something that can be settled quickly, given the consequences of the actions that have played out. So how long do you think we're looking at here?
Well, I really couldn't speculate on that. It's really, up to India whether they are willing at some point to collaborate, to cooperate with Canada, and get to the bottom of this. So the ball's in their court.
Cameron MacKay, Canada's most recent High Commissioner to India, I want to thank you very much for your time today, sir.
Thanks, David.